Is Lev micless?
No, he's got a mic.
He's mic'd up?
Yeah, they're rotating a mic.
What do you think of that beard?
It's coming in.
It is coming in.
Finally.
He's the Christian Bale of Jamies.
Mm.
Do you remember me asking you this?
Yeah, yeah.
You have a Jamie?
Yeah.
You're like, no.
We didn't know what Jamie looked like. We still don't know.
What is a Lev?
Yeah.
What is the answer? Do you remember that?
The Lev is AI. What did we say?
He is the human
Yeah.
manifestation of AI.
Yeah,
That's what Lev.
that's Lev.
Yeah. Do you have a Lev in your business?
No, but my 17-year-old son is trying to grow a beard like that right now. So
God bless him.
He
God
just
bless him.
compared you to a 17-year-old. But
Yeah.
how does that feel?
Lev. I was in junior high school still.
You did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. I embrace it. I think beards are the way to go. I think if you're in a grocery store, do you still go to grocery stores?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Some people just have a grocery store. If you go to a grocery store and it's going down at a grocery store, there's a guy with a rifle, right? And AR-15, what have you. Things are going bad. Fruit flying everywhere. Everybody's ducking and covering, right? Am I painting this picture?
You're painting it.
Okay.
Who's going to save you? The guy with your face, which is too handsome.
Yeah, me.
Yeah.
I'm
no.
running.
Or it's guys like you and
Or
me.
the psychos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's like the guy with the beard. Who's going to protect you? The guy with the baby face or the guy with the beard?
Well, if we're in California, nobody.
Right.
And
Or
we're coming in hot.
Yeah.
We don't even know who this guy is yet.
we're
The
about to get
viewers
canceled.
are
Well, I'm from Canada, so I really can't say much, I guess.
Oh,
No, you can't say much.
you can say whatever.
Yeah. No, nobody at home has internet. Where are you from, by the way? So let's get into it real quick. Let's introduce who our guest is.
Well, my name is Riley Edwards,
Cool.
from Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, of all places.
Sounded pretty
If
Canadian.
you've never heard of it, then probably like most people.
Yeah.
But it's south of Calgary. And so if you know Calgary Flames or the Calgary Stampede, that's how I grew up, around those kind of things.
Was that close to Edmonton?
Edmonton is like 5 hours north. So
Okay. You're south.
it's a little bit of
Yeah.
a drive, but
yeah.
when you're from Alberta, 5 hours isn't that long a drive.
It's rare that we meet Canadians.
I feel like they're everywhere, though.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah, that's even in celebrity land. Justin Bieber's, the Drakes, the Jordan B. Petersons,
That's true.
there's another guy who's
How about number 99?
Like little, yeah, Gratz. man.
That's absolutely.
Yeah.
Little,
Shania Twain is from Canada.
Yeah.
Really?
By the way, that's Thomas for all of you guys.
everybody's high school crush.
The nice way.
Mhm.
You just aged yourself pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was Cindy Crawford.
Oh, mine is still Cindy Crawford.
Yeah, she's such a
Elle
gorgeous kid.
McPherson.
Yeah,
Cindy
no,
Crawford.
and she's younger. Elle McPherson's younger, I think. Cindy Crawford's old.
I don't really know. All I know is that my dad used to get the Sports Illustrated, so every once in a while there was a swimsuit edition.
Remember Sports Illustrated? Is that around still?
No.
Yeah, it's still around.
Is
The
it
magazine?
Absolutely.
Really?
in circulation?
Oh, I don't know about the magazine, but
Yeah.
it's Sports Illustrated still a thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Well, getting back to it. So you're from some town in Calgary that named the town after
Alberta.
a bridge.
Mm.
After a bridge. Left.
In Alberta. So Alberta's like,
Yeah.
is a province, right?
Absolutely.
It's like a state. And so everybody will ask you if you're from, if they're talking about Canada, they'll ask you if you're from a Providence, right? Like Rhode Island.
Providence.
It's like, it's like, no, it's a province.
Right. Sure.
And inside that province, I grew up in a city called Lethbridge. Some people call it Deathbridge.
Because they're named their city after a bridge.
Yeah, but it's got a big train bridge that goes across a coulee is what it's called, river bottom. And Lethbridge. That's where I'm from.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Then what are you doing in sunny Southern California?
Well, I started a business like 13 years ago, but if you go back before then, I always had a desire to kind of get out of that place because it was small and lucky for me, I had a dad that really, really wanted me to go out and see some different things before I decided to permanently settle there.
Is he Canadian also?
He's Canadian, but has dual citizenship. And I don't know, I think he just thought there was, there's a whole world out there. And so if you decide to come back and settle in Lethbridge, that's fine. I have a brother that lives there. But I think he wanted me to do that based on having experience being other places. And so I can remember the first time that I left Canada was to actually go and do a job related to what I do now.
How old were you?
I was 21. So I had just gotten back from an LDS mission. If you guys know what those are, the
Yeah.
guys with the name tags
Yeah.
and knocking on your door.
They'll rake your leaves.
Yeah, be nice to them.
Little known
Yeah.
fact, if they come knocking on your door, did you know this?
No.
So if LDS boys come to your door and they're on their mission, right? Technically, as far as I understand, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a pro, but they knock on the door, they're wearing white shirt and the trousers, right? The slacks,
Backpack.
backpack,
Yeah.
bicycle, right?
Maybe even a helmet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stereotypes.
But let's say, for example, you're trying to do some yard work, put up a fence. As I understand it, they will help you do it.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things that they're encouraged to do is do service for people in the community that they're in. And so,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, they face some pretty hefty challenges in doing what they do with their missionary work.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that they're supposed to make an influence on the community that they're part of is to do service. And a lot of times that service is done without any kind of expectation for having to listen or conversion or anything like that. It's just a way for them to contribute to the community because the LDS faith actually, really feels like that's an important part of things is to belong to the society in a meaningful way. And so, they'll do service for you.
Christmas lights?
Did you
Does that draw a line?
I don't know. Like if you get,
put up your fence yet?
No, I didn't. That would be good.
if you have some OSHA sensitive things going on your property, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rules are anymore. They've
They should
changed
wear
a
the
lot
lights
since I was there, but
Yeah.
but what happened is I went on this mission, right? And so went on this mission, came back, was trying to figure out what I was going to do regarding school and things like that, and ended up having a friend hit me up and said, "Hey, we went and sold pest control door to door in North Carolina, and we're putting a crew together to go to Vegas, right? So now you got like a Mormon group of kids going to Vegas, not your
Have you ever-
not your typical thing."
Yeah. At that point, did you know anything about Las Vegas?
Yeah, I'd been to Vegas before.
Oh,
so,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
All right, cool.
traveled down there. My grandparents used to go a bunch. And anyway, so they invited me to do this, and I went and talked to my dad, and taking it back to my dad. And when I asked him, it was really interesting to see how much different his response to that was than my friends. Immediately, he was like, "Yeah, you should go do it." Like no hesitation.
Wow.
And we got other parents that are being like, "Are you sure? This is sounds like a scam. You could stay here and your dad can get you a job, or hey, you've got this uncle that does this. It's a sure bet." And my dad, like right when I asked him, it was like no hesitation. Yeah, you should do this.
Yeah.
And it'd be a good thing for you. I've heard of other people doing it before, and what a great life experience. And so I went down and did that for my first summer. So I went down and sold this pest control door to door in Vegas. And, had all sorts of crazy experiences being in Vegas, knocking door to door, as you can imagine,
I can't.
growing up in Alberta, it's pretty funny, right? Like, so,
Could you?
I can imagine some horror stories.
Yeah. Horror story.
I
Absolutely.
think it was my second day on the doors, and I knocked on a door, and some woman in a bikini answers, right? And as you can imagine, if you grow up in Lethbridge, Alberta, you don't see a lot of bikinis. Weather, one, is a restriction that makes it really tough to wear bikinis.
Yeah.
Number two is you don't see a lot of plastic surgery ever either, right? So, I'm this young returned missionary LDS guy. This woman answers the door. She's in a bikini, obviously has a sizable breast augmentation, right?
God bless.
And so she answers the door, nonchalantly, like she answered the door like that all the time, which I'm sure she did.
Wait, slow it down. What month are we in?
This is
What's the temperature?
this is June. This is like beginning
matter.
of June,
Keep going.
end of May, beginning of June,
All right.
something like that.
I'm trying to get to the breast.
And okay, so anyway, so she answers the door and is like, "What do you want?" And I'm looking at her and like I cannot find the words, right? So, and I'm usually a pretty talkative person,
Yeah.
but I'm in a situation I hadn't been in before probably,
Sure.
and this woman was just staring at me. She's like, "What do you want?" And I couldn't come up with the words, and so I just gave her a flyer and said, "Thanks, have a good day," and walked walked
And
away.
that's how we came up with We Do
And-
Creepy.
Yeah. And so I probably did look pretty creepy, but it just totally caught me off guard because I came from such a small town environment
Sure.
where those things were, readily presented in front of you all the time.
I had really high hopes that
Turned into like a
like if you could invite him in,
Yeah.
you could sit down and tell her about.
I
Book of
wasn't
Mormon.
ready for that. That's
No,
for sure.
that was advanced level.
I was not ready, and it was probably obvious to her. So,
Where did you do your mission?
Provo, Utah, of all places.
Oh, okay, cool. That's where the IRS is, right?
I don't.
Is that where?
Yeah.
I feel like whenever you get there,
seems like you got a letter recently
numbered as
as
well.
well.
I think Ogden,
Shout
Utah,
out
for the IRS.
Ogden, yeah,
Ogden.
yeah.
That's where
Look
he
at the
said-
Canadian. Look at the Canadian.
Yeah, I pay
Yeah.
my taxes.
I pay my taxes too.
Yeah. So,
No comment.
Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately.
Where are all these DMs? IRS is DMing.
So to take you back to that story, so I went down and I had a good experience. We had some friends that went down. We had a really great time, and I learned a little bit about selling. And then I was on my way home, and I called my dad. I was trying to get everything set up, and I called my dad to give him my schedule. And he said, "Riley, I've been thinking about this, and it's fine if you come home, but you're not welcome to stay here." And I had a bedroom in the house I grew up in the basement that I'd lived in for a year after I'd gotten home from my mission. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, you're welcome to come home, but you're not welcome to live here." And I said, What do you mean?" And he's like, "I just don't want to make it any easier for you to stay here."
Wait.
And I said, "Well, so what does that look like?" And he's like, "Well, I'm glad you asked, because your brother, who's going to school in the States right now,
Yeah.
happens to have a professor that's on sabbatical, and he's watching his house, and they happen to have a bedroom in their basement that they're willing to let you stay in, and he's already got you enrolled in classes." So my dad and my brother had been scheming
Oh wow.
a way to keep me
Yeah.
in the States so that I could just stay and have a different experience. And then, now we're 20 years from that, and well, more than that, 23 years from that, and here I am, officially an American citizen now.
Are you?
Yeah,
Taking the oath.
my wife is a dual citizen. She's Canadian and American, and so through that I was able to get citizenship, and here I am.
Yeah.
USA.
Look at that, dude.
I like it.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good story. So now I kind of want to ask you some questions, since you've kind of given us the origin story, right?
Mhm.
Which, I feel like is tied into your faith, because without that faith, right, you wouldn't have taken those initial steps.
Oh, most certainly.
Yeah. So let's rewind, right? Because we fast forwarded almost 20 years to where we are today. It's one thing to get into an industry and stay very comfortably as an employee, right?
Yeah.
What were the early indications to you that led you to believe in yourself, that you could make that transition that everyone dreams about? You see it on Instagram, right? All these thought leaders, all these like orators, all these guys, Tony Robbins and Grant Cardones of the world, they're all talking about, if you're working a 9 to 5, you're dead. Da, da, da. What were the indications early on where you're like, I can leapfrog, I can make this daring transition and risk it all from being an employee and being safe and having an income to being an entrepreneur and laying out these plans in a foreign country? Because you're not even, at
Yeah.
that point, you probably weren't even American yet, right?
Right.
So what were the early indications, and what were the initial first steps that you took? Like, you always say this, right? Like, when you're comfortable as an employee and you want to make the transition to being an employer, do you plot? Don't you say stuff like that?
In real estate, you have to plot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it's like.
And it's a bit nefarious.
Yeah. Because we spoke about that about you, I think 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how you kind of maneuvered. You were pretty upfront.
I was out.
Yeah.
I was out. But I think, again, right, you're saying that in your industry, you kind of have to plot.
Yeah.
But in your industry, and I want you to sort of explain this to the viewers, right? Because I know a little bit about it. It is an industry that is dominated by LDS people. And so we're speaking specifically about pest control, but what are the initial first steps you took, or what were the indications that you could take those initial first steps? And how did it make you feel that you were essentially, rejecting an employer who had helped you accomplish something, and maybe now competing directly with that person who embraced you and gave you this insight into this industry, which is very unique, very esoteric, right? So, yeah.
Well, in order to answer that question, we'd have to rewind just a little bit and talk a little bit more about my history, because this was never really a permanent job option for me, right? I did it as a job to make money to pay for college. And I was convinced I was on the fast track to go be a dentist or a doctor. So I have a degree in neuroscience.
Okay.
And I had an academic scholarship to a place called Weber State.
Is that in Utah?
Yeah, it's in Ogden, Utah. And then I transferred later to BYU. But I was merely going to do this job in order to pay for school,
right,
and get on the fast track to do that. Because when you grow up in Lethbridge, Alberta, the people that have the best lifestyle and the richest people in a small town are the dentists and the doctors, right? And so I felt like if I could become a dentist, my life would be solved, right? Like all my problems are solved.
Yeah.
I'm making $100,000 a year. And if I can make $100,000 a year, I mean, like,
problem solved.
Everything's gravy after that, right?
Sure.
And so as it happens, life kind of hits you in the face. And I had a couple really key moments in my life that kind of transitioned my thinking into getting to the point that you were talking about, where it's like, okay, maybe I could actually do this, right?
Yeah.
And so the first part was that I never really got great grades in high school. I had over 100 absences in my senior year of high school.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, and
Not me.
Oh, that's you.
Not me.
I used to get dropped off at the seminary building, right? So we'd have early morning seminary, and if it was snowing at all, we would just walk through the front door and then out the back, back with my car.
Good God.
And we would drive to the ski hill and snowboard for the day, right? And then I get home,
good life,
and I knew exactly when the attendance computer from our school would call our house, right? So I'd be there to intercept the call. So it'd be like, okay, at such and such a time, I need to be there. And you'd pick up the phone and be like, hello, this is LCI attendance computer. You're a student.
We're sitting next to the modern day Ferris Bueller.
Yeah.
Yes, it's him, dude.
So you're a student was absent for one or more classes, right? And so I'm on the phone. Oh yeah, I'll come over later at night or whatever. Pretend it was one of my friends, and then hang it up. And we played that game for at least a couple of years with my parents not ever really getting the attendance computer to call them. Every once in a while, we'd get caught, but I had 100 absences and was never really that applied in school. And then when I went on my mission and I came back, I learned a lot about discipline through that. And so when I got to school, I thought to myself, well, after I paid my tuition, so that story would go back to my dad had enrolled me in those classes. I went and I paid my tuition at Weber State, and I had to pay out-of-state tuition. So after I'd earned this money selling door to door, I went and paid my tuition. I think I had like $30 in my bank account after I paid this tuition. So I was like, okay, I have to figure something out, because I can't work full time on campus because I'm an international student. I already started school 2 weeks late because my brother and my dad had not told me about this plan they had for me. And so I had to go in and try to get an on-campus job. That's the only job you can have as an international student. Convince this guy named Carl to give me a job, right? And so I got a job doing networking for the computers in the computer labs there. And I could only work 20 hours a week. That was the max I could work. So I was doing this job, trying to figure things out. And, I had two options. I could get a scholarship, or I could find a job where I could make more money. And so the sales job became more and more appealing for me because I needed the money, right? And so I started doing this job, multiple summers in a row, right? And so I had done the pest control for 2 years, and then I got into doing alarms, actually, door to door, if you've ever knocked into those guys, or if those guys have ever knocked into you, pardon me. And I made $100,000
Whoa.
my third year doing this as a door knocker. And that's when I kind of started thinking about things and saying, well, maybe this is a possibility, but I still wasn't willing to like give up on my dreams. And like, I think my parents had an idea that if I was to do the doctor or dentist route, that would be really fulfilling for them,
Yeah. It's
and
something to brag about.
yeah.
Nice.
And you go to these things where I have two brothers that are dentists, right? And so, every once in a while you're talking about your family and they're like, well, what happened? What happened to you, right? Like, how did you end up being a bug guy, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I started doing really well at this. And at the same time, I started applying my knocking schedule. I was really disciplined knocking. That's why I did good at it. I started applying that to school and got my academic scholarship and then transferred to BYU. Got married, and then I had like a couple life events that really changed my perspective and allowed me to be a little bit more free, right? Because when you grow up in an LDS environment, there's certain benchmarks that you're trying to hit, right? Those are encouraged, like the mission, and then marriage is highly encouraged, and so as soon as you get back from your mission, there's typically a lot of chatter about getting married, right? So you're dating to marry, and I had gone through a couple dating experiences there, transferred to BYU. Met a really great gal that I ended up marrying. And unfortunately, 2 years later, the unorthodox path of a Mormon, I got divorced. And, when you go through a divorce and you're LDS, it's pretty devastating, right? Because everything in your upbringing, the expectations, the psyche of the people around you are like so emotionally tied to these benchmarks that when something like that happens, it's like you automatically think you're wearing the scarlet letter. Yeah. You start to question a ton of things that you really had a lot of built-in security in, some ideas that you had some built-in security in.
Does it make you question the faith, Tim?
I never got to the point where I questioned the faith. I think that I did that early on, and I was willing to adopt the faith based on culture alone. And, and then the belief side was always easy for me.
Yeah.
But so I went through this divorce, and it was really tough because everything else in my life, if I'm honest about it, come pretty easy to me. Yeah. I was I had no problem applying myself. I felt like I was pretty good socially, so I had good networks. And then this is the first time something ever happened to me where I couldn't control the outcome.
Right.
And when you have something that happens to you where you can't control the outcome, then it kind of forces you to enter a new space where you have to reconcile that somehow, emotionally, strategically, to get around it and to move on with your life. And so when that happened, the plan that I had built for my life kind of just shattered, right? Yeah. And it was such a blessing because now I was able to decide how I was going to put that back together. So
it's funny because you said it's a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
So 20 years in the future, you look back on it and go, wow, what a blessing.
Yeah.
But in the moment.
Oh, it was devastating.
Right.
Right. And every day I woke up with a pit in my stomach.
Right.
Every day I woke up wondering, how am I going to get through this, right?
Because we gloss over these things and just pause for 1 second,
yeah.
right? In business especially, when something bad happens, right? But regulators from the state of California, or federal government, a competitor, something like that, right? It's that same feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Where you're like in the middle of a hurricane or something and everything's spinning out of control around you, right? And you can't control anything. And so at the time, you're like, how do I get everything back on track? We've all felt that way, right? But then fast forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Like, how is a blessing that happened because I learned X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And I would interject there and say, you do have control over something, right? You, like when you say you can't control anything, I know what you mean by that, but you can control the way that you react to it, right? The problem there is that you can't control the other party.
Right.
involved. And so many instances in my life before that, it was all when I was single. So I had complete autonomy. Like I had control over my life, but now I had no control over what that other person's decision was going to be. And inevitably, no matter what I wanted, it was going to affect me. And so the reason that was such, a good thing looking back is it just totally freed me up to start thinking about things differently. And so all of a sudden I thought, well, shoot, I don't have any like reputation to uphold. I've already failed at meeting the benchmarks, right? And so much of my life had been wrapped up in being a certain thing or whatever. It allowed me just to like let go and start exploring other possibilities. And so from that point, I thought to myself, well, I mean, what's the worst that could happen if I try to do my own thing and it fails? Like my backup is going to be dental school.
Well, so
Pretty good backup.
that's that's the best backup ever.
Yeah.
So wait, so in the middle of this blank storm, right, where the marriage is falling apart and you're getting divorced, you come up with this idea like I'll start my own company.
Yeah.
Good God.
Well, and
Talk about inviting chaos.
and get this. Well, so, and the really interesting thing about it is that it happened right when we had the housing meltdown, right?
This is like 2008.
Correct.
Oh,
So, we had just gotten to this new place. We just bought a new house,
gosh.
and things went south, fell apart. And so now I'm left with this house that I got to decide if I want to, give back to the lender, or if I want to try and ride out the storm. And I just thought to myself, okay, this is actually the best time ever to do something like this, because if I can make it happen when the market is crap and when things are falling apart, it's like, imagine what's going to happen when things come back, right?
You had that foresight.
Yeah, well, I just knew that like if you could make it happen now, you could make it at any time.
Do you have,
And so
do you have that type of foresight when things are spinning out of control?
I was just a glutton for punishment, man.
Yeah.
At that point, I
At
wouldn't.
21, no.
What did I have to
You were
do?
21,
Oh,
right?
this time I'm older. So I was 21 when I started
Yeah.
filming, right? So now at this point, I'm like 28.
Okay.
Think?
Yeah.
All right. That's a little
If I
bit.
remember.
relevant
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just thought to myself, like, what do I have to lose? I've got nothing to lose at this point, right? I just had somebody tell me that like I wasn't going to work out for them as a life partner,
Right.
right? And to that point, I'd been like pretty good socially and accepted widely in a lot of different circles, and I felt pretty good about myself as a person,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And then you get like that ultimate rejection in that way. And then it was like, okay, well, what do I have to lose? And if there was ever a time to do it, it's now, because if I can make it happen when the market is the worst it's been in, however many years, then think about what's going to be on the other side, right? So I got all geared up. I went out and sold for one more summer so I could put some money away, and then decided I was going to start my own company. And in the midst of that, it was probably about 2 years actually from that point where I started my own. And a year and a half after my divorce happened, I met my wife, who I'm currently married to. And lucky for me, she was super encouraging, and she grew up in
That's important.
pretty humble circumstances. So I thought she was like, well, who cares? Give it a whirl. See what happens. And so
What a blessing.
I started my own company, and it it took off, and
Let's push
here
forward.
we are.
Well, you are such an amazing orator, because I almost got lost in the sauce for a moment. You were supposed to explain, unless I missed something, what the indications were that you could do this as an employer. You're like, yeah, dude, I just went out there and I sold, made a bunch of money, and then I'm like, dude, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it.
He answered the question.
You think so?
Yeah.
So here's the proof, right? The proof is that I'd gone several summers,
Yeah.
where I had done well. I had recruited and built sales teams and done that for somebody else.
Okay, so that's different.
And so here's actually, you'll like this part. So here's the crux of it, right? So I went this one I really started thinking about it, which was probably a year before my divorce, right? Maybe a year and a half before my divorce. But what happened is I had got invited to go on a cruise that I won as a sales incentive, right, with one of the companies I was with. So um, I feel like this could go a lot of different ways, but so I was out selling, right? I had this academic scholarship. I was dating this girl that I had just broken up with that I'd been dating for quite a while. And I decided to drop all my classes and I went to Central America, backpacked through Central America for 2 months.
Oh, wow.
I did it on my own, got a Lonely Planet travel guide, learned a little bit of broken Spanish,
Yeah.
and went to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and traveled around with a bunch of European people that do it. In fact, there's a bunch of Israeli people that go and do that after they get out of the army,
After
right?
you get out of the army.
Yeah. So anyway, met a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And when I was doing that, I got an email from the guys that I worked for. This is when I had made a switch to alarms. And they said, hey, we've got our company cruise coming up. And I'm like, sorry, guys, I'm cruising around Central America. I'm not going to make it. And they're like, not going to make it? They're like, hey, you're a big part of this. We need you to be there. And so I said, well, I'll think about it, right? And so these broken emails every couple of days when I'm at an internet cafe are getting exchanged between me and the owner. And finally, he just said, I already bought you a flight to fly into LAX on this day. If you fly in there, you'll be able to make the cruise. So after thinking about it, I thought, oh, it'd be a good experience to have. And I gotta go back to work at some point. And so I decided to jump on a plane, flew back to LAX, went from LAX down to the port and, stayed in a hammock actually in LAX. So I flew in like late at night, put a hammock between two poles, I remember. And I'm sleeping in this hammock between these two poles that are in LAX in one of the terminals. And I wake up to somebody like washing the windows over top of me. So I'm like, get a couple drips on the face. And I'm like, well, I look over and there's this janitor guy and he's just like, oh, no problem, and it's just like cleaning the windows over top of me. And I went down on this cruise, had a great time. And on my way home, this is the point of the story. On my way home, I stop in Vegas to see the guys that I originally sold for. That's where their office is.
Okay.
And I go to the office, I've been there a bunch of times. I walk in the door and they're not there. I ask, where these guys are. They're not there. And everybody's wearing Terminex shirts.
Oh, okay.
And so they're like,
franchise.
yeah, we just bought them.
Oh.
We just bought their company. And of course, I'm in Central America. I'm knocking doors for a different company at this point. So I had no clue what was going on. And so I found out that they had sold to Terminex, and I found out how much they had sold to Terminex for.
What that number looked like?
30 million, I think, something like that, if I remember correctly.
And what was revenue back then?
Oh gosh, I couldn't tell you that. I don't know. Like that's the problem, right? Is I wasn't paying attention to those details because I was going to be a dentist.
You do now, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, right? But I was going to be a dentist, and when I heard that number, I thought to myself, well, gosh, we helped them build that,
Right.
and so there's probably like some room for other people to do their own thing, right?
Sure.
And so at that point, I started thinking about the fact that I had done enough and had enough experience to where I could probably do this on my own. And, for me, I'm a pretty simple person. And so I don't ever have these like illusions of grandeur. Like I'm quite happy to sit in the background and build something that gives me freedom. Money has never, ever been my primary goal. It's always been freedom.
Is that the Canadian side of your brain, or is that the
For sure.
side?
So like I grew up in a place where people are really simple. And there's just something magical and authentic about the way that people are there. And people take great pride in being that way. Like I don't want to generalize too much, but it's people that have conservative values, but are almost like anti the American dream ideal, which is like, oh, I'm going to have a big house and a big car. It's like, no, I'm going to drive a Honda Accord. And the reason I'm going to drive a Honda Accord or a Toyota Camry is because these are the most practical vehicles you'd ever buy. And I think freedom for people there is much more important than stuff.
In Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
so I think that was probably one of the biggest differences is that I had a lot of friends in the United States that I think they measured their value a lot of times by things outside themselves. And so I constantly had guys giving me a hard time about driving a Dodge Neon when they were driving Hummers. You know, I had a Dodge Neon and they would be like, why you still drive that? And then, I know how much money you made last year. Why are you still driving that? I can't believe it, you know? And like for me, that was a win. Like that showed me that if I was doing something different than everybody else, I was probably on the right track.
Yeah.
And I think that in the way that I grew up or the place I grew up is authenticity is much more important than presenting yourself as a certain way, right? To borrow a quote from a Mormon guy, right? Like he says, this is Stephen R. Covey. If you guys ever heard of Covey,
Of course, yeah.
he's a legend. But like in one of his books, he says that fashion is the science of appearances and inspires one with a desire to seem rather than to be. And I never wanted to seem to be anything. My desire is to be whoever I am authentically. And I never ever wanted to be confused or mixed in with people that pretend to be something that they're not. And so, you know, it comes with its advantages and disadvantages, right? Like I'm pretty conservative in the way that I run my business, and I drive a Prius, right?
Have you seen them around town?
Yeah, it's like hyper practicality.
Yeah.
But the reason I do those things is because it doesn't matter how much money you make, you can get into a situation where you start borrowing strength from things, and it puts you in a place where it limits your freedom. And freedom for me is the biggest goal, right?
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like when you first got into being someone who was self-employed, did you see the upside as a path to goods? I can have a big house, I can have fancy cars, I can go on these vacations, I can have these things. Or did you look at it from the perspective of time is something that you can give but never get back? You know, amongst traded commodities between human beings, right? The give and take of human interaction, I always say. The currency that's exchanged between humans is time, attention, love, adoration. Time is the most valuable one. Were you thinking of becoming an entrepreneur as something that could fast track you to goods, things? Or was it more like, how can I accumulate?
I think it was just to get out of the rut. Like, I don't like being told what to do by someone who's not as smart, not as strong, not as fast, not as good looking either. But I just couldn't take someone telling me what to do anymore.
So it was
I had the stuff.
So it was time.
Yeah.
It was time.
It was really time. It was just maybe respect. Time was a factor. I think time plus respect equals freedom, maybe.
I think if you put respect in a pot and you let it simmer long enough, right, the respect evaporates. And really what's left in the pot is just time. Because time, right, is really the biggest freedom that we can all strive for, right, as entrepreneurs, right? And you're saying, well, you come from Canada and you're LDS and these are your conservative values. At the end of the day, right, you don't want to derive power from goods, from things, from the accumulation of items, right? Instead, it's how can I preserve my authenticity while still building a foundation of success for my employees and their families, and also doing the same for my family, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, look, I'm not claiming to be a saint. Like I like taking vacations and I like nice things, but my nice things are probably more tied into experiences than actual items, right? And
I always looked at it from that perspective.
Always. And it's, it actually sometimes is a little bit lonely in that area because not all people feel the same way. But that's not a dig at anybody else. Like there's some people that are really into cars, or there's some people that are really into things, right? And everybody has the freedom to decide, the things that they're going to be into. But for me, like I just only know how to be one way. And obviously that has a lot to do with my upbringing. And I love the way that I grew up.
Right.
I love where I grew up. I think the weather here is way better. And there's some real advantages to being here over where I grew up. But like, I had one of the best possible upbringings you could imagine.
Yeah.
And I want to stay true to that. And part of the reason I want to stay true to that is that it's getting harder and harder to live that kind of life in this environment. And so I want to be authentic for my kids too.
Well, define this environment. What do you mean?
So, I live in a lot bigger city and experience than with my kids than I did growing up. And so I think it's sometimes hard to hold those principles and standards that I grew up with and to transfer those to your kids if you're not in this environment that's really similar, right? And so you got to be a lot more proactive for that. And so I think the best gift that I can give my kids is to stay authentically that way. And they're going to forge their own path, and it's going to be different. I mean, look, I'm living a life that if you had asked my 16-year-old self if I'd be living this life, I'd have thought you were crazy if you told me this is the way it was going to turn out.
Right.
I mean, I am infinitely blessed, and I am so I'm so lucky. I hate using the word lucky, but like really, I'm lucky. There are a lot of conditions that happened at certain times in my life to put me where I'm at today that have nothing to do with my own personal efforts or tailoring to get there.
Yeah.
Lucky for me, I was raised in a way and with parents that taught me how to take advantage of opportunities and see them. And I'm living a life that I probably never would have even dreamed possible as a 16-year-old.
What he's talking about is something that I fight with on a day-to-day basis. I don't know about you, but you're sitting on Instagram, let's say it's late at night, and you're flipping through your feed, and you're bombarded with capitalism, right? You're bombarded with the philosophy that more is better, newer is better, bigger is better, right? And this is, I think this is like etched into the psyche of most Americans, which is just like, it's a consumer economy, right? And you always have, like iPhone, right? There's a new iPhone out every year. Is it any different than the last iPhone? Not really, but you got to get it, right?
Yeah.
So how can you get it? And you see, going back to this Instagram thing, you see all these guys or gals promoting something on Instagram, selling something. And the video is a showcase of what they've accumulated in terms of things. It's boats, ATVs, UTVs, trucks, cars, airplanes, and helicopters.
Yeah.
Right? And it's name brand this and it's name brand that. And this is what they're selling to other people. And at best, it's a facade. At worst, they're rentals. Yeah. And somewhere in between, it's financed, which is probably just as terrible.
Yeah.
And it is tough to raise a family in an environment that is hostile to conservative values.
Well, but even in those conservative values, like you see, some of these people you're talking about are conservative people, right? Or opportunists, I guess, in that space.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the reason that they do that is because it works, right?
It does work, but going back to the family, right? That's one thing. That's selling. I get that. Because, they're promoting something, they're selling, and they're selling this dream that a guy at a 9-to-5 can achieve these goals. And aspirationally, you have to delineate, sort of like make a list of, okay, well, if you do as I say, do as I do, you'll be able to check off these things on your checklist. Big home, fancy car, boats, vacations, luxury watches. And I think that's okay to the extent that it motivates people to take that leap of faith, like we talked about early on in this podcast, which is making that leap of faith from an employee to an employer. I think what I fight with, what I wrestle with is at night when you're sitting on Instagram and you're seeing this stuff, it's easy to fall victim to adopting those items, those things, that belief system, that consumerist thought, that liberalization of your mind where it's like, I don't want to say you're turning your back on faith, but you really are adopting some of these items, right, as a faith system. You're moving your chips from here, which is culture, which is religion and faith, and you're putting your chips over on different numbers on the roulette table, hoping that it hits those numbers. And I liken it, do you surf at all?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was younger, I surfed a lot. And I remember one of the earliest lessons that I learned in surfing was don't paddle out as the wave is breaking in your face. Right. And I talk to my kids about this all the time, which is don't fight the ocean current. Don't fight the ocean current. The ocean is 100 and 0, 1,000 and 0, 1,000,000 and 0. The ocean doesn't lose, right? Don't paddle out when the wave is breaking in your face. And to liken it back to what we see on Instagram, the wave is constantly breaking in our faces. So you're a conservative guy with conservative values, thrust from Canada, a very small, right? A very small town into, well, Bikiniville,
Yeah.
which is Vegas, right? And because that's where you kind of like, that's where you got your sea legs, right? That's where you learn to sell, really.
Yeah.
And then you come into California, Southern California, which is a fast-paced, I would say, it is an area of the United States that has maybe given up on faith and has adopted different principles, which are, liberalism. And I'm not trying to like go political on this podcast because I'm sort of right in the middle. I don't skew from, I'm not on one end of the spectrum, I'm not on the other end of the spectrum. But it is tough to raise kids in that environment and still preserve your faith. And that's something that I think people want to understand, which is, all right, listen, you got kids, you got baseball on the weekends, right? Specifically Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that out with, keeping your faith with, church, Sunday school, those types of things, giving your family the same access, right, to things that will help them develop both as a person and an athlete, but not feeling like you're, thwarting their growth in your faith, which has led you to have this type of success. Because I think generationally, right, like with regard to wealth, you show me one successful son, right, whose success was built by his father. So a second generation successful young man who hasn't fallen victim to what I'm talking about, which is this Instagram lifestyle. Mm-hmm. I'll sell you, oceanfront property in Arizona.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to look at it for what it is, right? And when you started talking about moving those chips to the other side of the table, I think that's especially poignant because that represents to me anyways that what I don't want to do, which is I don't want to bet on those things because like you can justify anything, right? If your number one focus is money.
Right. Yeah.
And so the problem is you get these people that move the chips over there, right? And like the whole act of moving the chips over there
mm-hmm.
is like leaving something behind and betting on something new. And the whole thing for me anyways, when I see that is that's like trading your integrity or compromising for money. And I never want to compromise for money. It's the same thing with my company, right? Like people always ask me, why did you start your own company? Well, I can tell you right now, when you're in a door knocking environment, right? It's kill or be killed, right? So you're out there knocking. I've only had a commission job since that one on-campus job at school. The only job I've had as an adult really is a commission-only job. So I only was able to earn what I went out and sold. And so in that environment, people can compromise their values all the time. I mean, look, I was knocking with guys that had just gotten home off missions, right? And all of a sudden they're talking about their values on Sunday, but then they're lying to people about how it's not a contract, or they're running a dead family member's credit because this person couldn't get credit in order to sell something, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I got paid $500 to do that, right? And so what happens is in these organizations, especially the door knocking organizations, what happens is they become really sales centric. And so they're so focused on sales that everybody ascribes or pulls their value from how many accounts they sold in a summer, right?
Right.
So when you go talk to these guys, how many do you sell? Well, I sold 1,000 accounts. And for a business owner, you may start asking questions like, well, how many of these accounts got serviced? And they're like, oh, well, 600. And it's like, okay, so you sold 600 accounts. Well, no, I sold 1,000, but only 600 were funded.
What does that mean?
So what'll happen is they'll sell an account, and the account has to stay good for a certain amount of time, right? It has a maturation period. And so if the customer doesn't pay their bill, or, in these kind of sales environments, a lot of people show up, the service technician shows up, and the people say, no, we just didn't want to say no to the sales guy, or he told us it was going to be this way, but the service technician now is saying, well, no, it's not that way. And so you have a bunch of these people that are willing to bend the rules or not tell people the whole truth, right? Because there's a high commission on the other side of that deal.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what really got me into wanting to do my own business as well, is that like back before they had reputation management software and things like that in my business, people had, 2.5-star rating nationwide.
Right.
Sales guy didn't tell me the whole truth. The service technician didn't show up. They tell you they're going to do this and that, but they only do this, right? And so you have like this whole wake of chaos, right? And it's changed quite a bit with the landscape. But when I first started doing it, it was mostly Mormon kids that were doing this. Right. They had all the experience of getting rejection day in and day out, knocking doors on the mission.
Brilliant?
Oh, it's like
That's where they earn.
sense, yep.
Yeah, they're knocking doors,
they're,
right?
they're raising these soldiers to go out and be part of this. And these companies, a lot of times, they just choose the product that is going to give them the best margin. And so you have all these sales companies that happen to do pest control, or a sales company that happen to do alarms. And the one thing that just always like got me is that I would be running around putting out fires of these guys that would say or do anything to get a deal, right? And the reason that they're doing that is because the company now is promoting and valuing sales over anything else, right? And so it's like, okay, you have 3 people in this interaction. You have a customer, you have the company, and you have the salesperson, right?
Yeah.
And if only 2 out of the 3 can win, then which 2 people do you think are going to win first?
Understood.
The company's going to win first, and the sales rep's going to win first, right? And so now when somebody shows up and they're like, no, we're not going to do all that. It's like, why the hell would somebody tell me that? Right? Well, they're telling you that because there's a commission on the other side of that, right? And so for me, part of the reason I started my own company is I really honestly felt I could start a pest control company that happened to have a good sales team, not a sales company that happened to do pest control.
Right. And there is a difference.
And yeah, there's a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I can tell you the differences based on not just my opinion, but guys that have come from other companies, and they're like, oh my gosh, we actually do what we say we're going to do.
Totally.
Right. And people say, well, how are you able to do that? How are you able to do that? Because all these other companies are, they're like, well, we're the fastest growing. Like, I love this stuff all the time, right? It's all optics, right? And they're business is recruiting young people to go and sell the product. That's their business. They're not a pest control company. And so they have these huge, these huge headquarters with, the basketball courts and the cafeteria and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it looks like a tech company.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is, right? But like one of the things that they're not telling people is they have these recruiting meetings, right? And these kids come in and they meet with the recruiter who's got, a $700 pair of Jordans on, right? He's got a Tesla Plaid in the parking lot. And maybe he made 300 grand last year, right? Because those guys are making good. Maybe he made more than like top regionals. They're making much more than that, right? But like one of the constant things in that world is people are always coming to me for pay advance or a sign-on bonus or whatever.
Right.
And the reason is they're a classic sales guy, right? Which is living in all this flash and all this stuff to manifest to people that I'm successful, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm trying to help these guys understand that like once they get into that rat race, they understand the mistake they've made, right? But it's really hard for somebody to not double down and just try and blaze their way out of that because they've come accustomed to the house, they've come accustomed to the car, but they're dealing with insecurity as financially the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So the point is that like I wanted to actually create an environment where all three of those people in the transaction can win. And the only way that you can do that is if the customer wins first.
Yeah. And this is what I talk about all the time, which is like, you have different models for how you build companies. You can build a company that is fast paced and and sort of like what matters are the sales numbers, or you can build a stakeholder model where the customer comes first, right? Employees come second, right? And then the stakeholder comes third. And I think, we've talked about this before, but Southwest Airlines uses that model. They take very good care of their employees because if you take very good care of your employees, the employees will take very good care of the customers, right? And then, if the customers are taken good care of, right, then the stakeholders will benefit. But I think, if I was to give advice to anyone wanting to start a business, the glory of owning your own business, right? I think when you're an employee is like, I can achieve these levels of success, money, house, cars, vacations, right? When in reality, what you want is time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're building a company, taking care of your employees and having them understand and subscribe to the fact that like, you guys are the reason that we have any of this stuff. The cafeteria, the basketball court, the foosball, all of that stuff, right, is because you guys worked hard. And this is the success that I want to share with you, right? And whether you're sharing that in terms of shared facilities like basketball court and gyms and stuff like that on-prem, or it's vacations, right? Like when you take your employees on vacations and stuff like that. I think it engenders the employees to believe that you are a fair, just ruler, right, of your fiefdom, of your kingdom. And I think the more incubators for that type of success we have in America, right, the more it promotes young men and women to build businesses using the right foundational thinking, right?
Yeah.
I think like when we build businesses, right, we never build it fearing that employees are going to leave, right, and start their own thing. In fact, we embrace it. We're like, hey, listen, I had a job as an employee. Today I'm an employer. And eventually you're going to do the same thing, right? And I'm going to show you the way. And I think it's taken me 40 years, right? Okay, 44 years. Fact check it. Thanks, love. But it's taken me 44 years to understand that as an employer, there is enough meat on the bone for everyone to get full, to never fear people leaving to start their own thing. In fact, culturally, if we can build companies that, again, have that foundational thinking, which is that stakeholder model, take care of your employees, they'll take care of the customers, which eventually will drip down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And take care of the stakeholders. Then you have stronger companies spread across America. I think one of the one of the most tragic things about American entrepreneurs is that 99% of them don't make it, that 99% of them fail in the first 2 years.